Now, another paradigm that I want to highlight is the cash transfers paradigm. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about the cash transfers paradigm. A common concern with cash transfers is that they can create disincentives in labor force participation and encourage consumption of what is called temptation goods like alcohol, tobacco, or things like gambling. So that's the common criticism, that when you give people cash transfers, well, they're going to use them for goods which are unproductive, and they are also going to be less likely to participate in the labor force. They won't work because they're receiving free money. But what does the evidence say? So let's think about cash transfers and temptation goods. Now, a 2014 World Bank report by David Evans and Anna Popova notes that cash transfers have been demonstrated to improve education and health outcomes and alleviate poverty in various contexts. However, policymakers and others often express concerns that poor households will use transfers to buy these temptation goods like alcohol, tobacco, and so on. So this particular paper reviews 19 studies from Latin America, Africa, and Asia, and provides quantitative studies which provide quantitative evidence on the impact of cash transfers on temptation goods. So what do these studies show? So what does this review find? The review finds that the majority of studies find neither no significant impact or a negative impact of cash transfers on temptation goods. A growing number of studies, they suggest, from a range of contexts, indicate that concerns about the use of cash transfers for temptation goods are actually unfounded. So the authors go on to say that some potential explanations why income transfers do not necessarily lead to consumption of temptation goods include the following. The income effect of cash transfers that would have increased expenditures of temptation goods like alcohol and tobacco and gambling and so on, those income effects may have been offset by substitution effects. So as people get cash transfers, they substitute to purchase goods which are productive. Also, they may have been offset by the effect of the social messaging about the appropriate use of cash transfers. So as cash transfer programs are implemented, if there is a social messaging encouraging people to use them appropriately, well, that will offset the income effect, which would increase expenditures on alcohol and tobacco and other temptation goods. Another reason is that the expenditure on temptation goods may have been offset by the effect of the shifting dynamics in intra-household bargaining. So as cash transfers are being received in a particular household, well, the dynamics of intra-household bargaining may entail that the cash transfers are used appropriately. Now, there is a reason to be thinking about these intra-household bargaining dynamics. So, for example, in previous studies, such as Esther Duflo's study on social cash transfers in South Africa, she basically finds that pensions or these cash transfers which were received by women had a large impact on the anthropometric status of children, particularly of girls. So the weight for height and the height for age indicators significantly improved if the cash transfer was being received by a woman as opposed to by being received by a man. So no similar effect was found for pensions received by men. So this demonstrates the intra-household dynamics that if a cash transfer is being received by a woman, in this case, it was used differently than when it was received by a man. So this suggests that the efficiency of public cash transfer programs may depend on the gender of the recipient. So that's an example of the intra-household dynamics. Another example I want to show you is based on a paper that I wrote. Again, it looks at social cash transfers in South Africa. And what we find in the paper is that when a cash transfer is being received by a female, so the cash transfer is a social pension, unconditional social pension. Female cash transfers lead to a decrease in male leisure time and also lead to an increase in the productive work of men. Whereas if the cash transfer is being received by a man, there is an opposite effect in that women's leisure time will increase and women's domestic work will decrease. So what this study shows is again a gender dynamic in how the cash transfer is used depending on who receives it. So basically what our study concludes is that when the cash transfer is being received by the woman, the man becomes more productive and reduces leisure time. And then when the cash transfer is being received by the man, it helps the woman reduce the burden and the drudgery of domestic work, and it helps increase the leisure time for the woman. So it's a very interesting intra-household bargaining that goes on. So there's this shifting dynamics in intra-household bargaining, and so that can have an effect on whether recipients of cash transfers use them for this so-called temptation goods or they don't. So let's talk a little more about these cash transfers. So and here is a question. Do cash transfers create labor market disincentives? So again, it's a similar concern or criticism about cash transfers that when people receive these cash transfers, they won't go to work. So there is a study by Scofios and Maro published in the Journal of Development Studies, which assessed a very popular cash transfer program, that's the Mexico's Progresa program. So they assessed the impacts of that program on adult labor force participation, adult leisure time, and poverty. And basically, the study finds a number of things. They find that the program did not have any significant effect on adult labor force participation and leisure time. They also find that the cash transfers program led to a substantial reduction in poverty. And they also find that the impacts were stronger in reducing the poverty gap and severity of poverty. So very strong impacts on poverty, very strong impacts on labor force participation. So here's another question. Are cash transfer programs more effective than non-cash transfer programs? The Consultative Group to Assist the Poor, which is a think tank on financial inclusion, basically carried out research comparing the cost effectiveness of 3 anti-poverty social protection interventions. They compared a livelihood development approach with a cash transfer approach and a graduation approach. So graduation approach is where people graduate into sustainable livelihood programs. And we'll explain a little more. Now, first, let's talk about the livelihood development approach. So this refers to a wide range of approaches to help poor people acquire productive assets and build the skills to use them. For example, promotion of new farming technologies would be a livelihood approach, or farmer group organizations to encourage different farming practices, or livelihood development programs which are implemented in rural areas, combining cash or in-kind grants and access to financial services. So that's the first approach, the livelihood development approach. So, and then the cash transfers approach is basically lump sum unconditional cash transfers, which basically are given to help the poor invest in income generating programs. Now the graduation program, so this is graduation into sustainable livelihoods. So, and this approach uses a holistic way to tackle simultaneously interrelated challenges faced by the poorest, giving them a set of services which include things like access to saving services, intensive mentoring, technical skills training, and so on. So the study reviewed 30 livelihood development programs, 11 lump sum unconditional cash transfers, and 7 graduation programs, resulting in a total of 48 studies being reviewed. So what did the results show? So assessing the cost effectiveness of these approaches, cost effectiveness was measured by assessing annual household consumption or income per dollar spent on a program. And among all 48 programs reviewed, the overall benefit cost ratio was the highest for lump sum cash transfers. The benefit cost ratio was 0.29, followed by livelihood programs with the benefit cost ratio of 0.2. And lastly, the graduation programs with the benefit cost ratio of 0.11. Now, however, the analysis then focused on particular programs which were being run over a longer time period, and so measuring long-term impacts, and also programs focusing on the extreme poor. Now, with that new focus, graduation programs were more cost-effective than livelihood programs. Graduation programs had a greater impact per dollar with a benefit cost ratio of 0.11 compared to 0.09 for livelihood programs when these factors were considered, that is the long-term impact and focusing on the extreme poor. Now, while lump sum cash transfers appear to have the highest impacts, there is still a need for more evidence, especially on long-term impacts of lump sum cash transfers, particularly to the extreme poor, in order to make better comparisons among these alternative types of delivery mechanisms. So that's a cost effectiveness analysis looking at these different paradigms. So as we think about these types of paradigms, be it the cash transfers paradigm or the social paradigm or the results-based aid paradigm, what this just shows is that there are new ways of doing development. These are new ways which are being proposed on how to do development differently. And these proposed ways still need to be tested, still need to be explored, they still need to be refined, but it just shows the direction where development interventions are going. And so these are good to know and good to be thinking about and exploring and even testing and challenging them with rigorous data, with rigorous evidence, so that new approaches are based on a good understanding of whether they work or they do not work.